Oh my God.
What's that?
Can't imagine.
Turn this off.
5 for me.
Okay, whenever you're ready. Oh. So somebody's texting me. Okay.
Okay, so I think I'm going to need to mute you guys so I don't get feedback.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm muting myself. Okay, that doesn't work. All right, so, okay, no, it sounds fine. It sounds fine. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that first slide there?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I totally don't mind if you guys want to all during the talks, or you have like your own tips that you want to share. I'm totally happy to, have you speak up during the talk. So feel free to do that. So, okay, let's see here. Okay, so today I am going to talk about obviously getting unstuck. So as when I came up with the topic, I gave Lewis the title and description, and it started out as getting traction when facing complex problems, but it kind of morphed into something a little more generic than that. So not just when you're facing complex problems, but just facing problems in general when you feel that feeling of being stuck and not being able to get any momentum work-wise. So just to give you just a tiny little bit of background for me, I've been doing web development for a little over 10 years. I started out freelancing. I was using mostly PHP, and then I discovered Ruby and Rails, and I fell in love. And I've now stopped freelancing, and I've been working at Grok for just coming up on 1 year doing Ruby Rails development. And I do feel like I have a lot to say about getting unstuck. It seems like it's been kind of this theme in my life that I've learned a lot of tricks and tips, and just have this little arsenal of those types of things to help when I notice that I'm experiencing a feeling of being stuck or procrastinating. So, and I think that given the nature of the work that we do as developers, I think feeling stuck is a common occurrence, at least for me it is. So what's also nice about some of these tips is that they can actually be applied to all aspects of your life, not just necessarily programming. A lot of the tips are programming related, but some of them are a little more generic. So first, starting with the basics, we've all obviously heard the advice to take a deep breath when we're feeling overwhelmed or frustrated. And even though it's simple, it's really actually powerful when you do it intentionally. And I personally like to take it a step further. So if you'd like, feel free to do this little practice along with me. So this is how I like to do it. So first, if I'm standing at my desk or wherever I am and I'm feeling a little frustrated or overwhelmed, I like to stop and close my eyes. And then I breathe out all the air from my lungs. And as I do that, I let all of my thoughts fall away. And then I take a long, slow, deep breath in. And then as I breathe out, I relax my face and I relax my shoulders. And I really do find that a lot of the times my shoulders are up at my ears. So it actually feels really good to relax my shoulders personally. I feel like as programmers, that's probably the case for a lot of us. I love to relax my hands. That feels good as well from being in that typing position, the mouse hand. I always have mouse hand cracking my knuckles, so that feels good. So I relax my entire body. And once I feel completely relaxed, I try to relax even just a little bit more than that. So lastly, as I'm fully relaxed, then I turn my attention to feeling my own presence, my own existence, and I just stay there for a few seconds. And every time I do this, when I remember to do it, I think that's the biggest thing, is trying to remember to do it. I find that every single time my mood is always lifted, and it's such a simple thing to do. So I just want to talk, this talk is not about procrastination, but I do feel it's important to touch on a little bit because I do feel it's related. So I think that feeling of being stuck can actually sometimes result in procrastination. And I do feel, like I said, it's a little bit related, and I've come to understand procrastination a little differently, and it ties in a little bit. So I just want to touch on this a little bit first before I dive into all of my little tips. So I actually have very early memories of procrastinating as a young kid, and that's why I said I feel like it's been a theme in my life. So we would have Sunday chores, and even that word just kind of dredges up bad feelings. I would watch my sister, she'd knock out all her chores and go off and play, and we weren't actually allowed to do anything else until chores were done. So I'd spend all day in my room avoiding them. And had I known back then what I know now, I was just a kid, so I didn't have the awareness, but I would have realized that all I had to do was make chores more enjoyable, fun. Like in that specific context, that's what would have made sense for me, because as a kid, I just wanted to have fun. Even the word chore makes even adults want to avoid it like the plague. So I think, putting on music, setting a timer, whatever to help a kid have fun doing chores would potentially solve that problem. So to me, procrastination is no longer this negative thing. I've always seen it as a negative thing. And I definitely feel like procrastination, laziness, they have negative connotations. But really, to me, procrastination has become a signal. So if I find myself feeling stuck or procrastinating or labeling myself as lazy, it's really just a signal about finding what's the missing link. I found I'm never procrastinating for no reason. There's always a good reason. It's actually a very wise thing to procrastinate, because really what it means on a subconscious level is you're not ready. You're not ready to work on what you think you're supposed to be working on. And it's finding that little missing piece that's the key. So I don't think I'm lazy. I no longer think I'm a procrastinator. I know that I personally, and that I would assume most people, love being productive. We love problem solving. So in my experience, I've found that anytime I'm in what I would have in the past called procrastination mode, I've discovered that there's actually good reason for my procrastinating. So like I said, a subconscious part of me knows I'm not ready. And I can tell when I'm ready to dive in because I'm just itching to jump in and get started. If I'm not itching to jump in and get started, I'm not lined up with something. On some level, there's a missing piece, and the key is finding that missing piece. So I feel like there are actually lots of reasons behind procrastination, and in every situation, it's always a little different. And it's not about beating procrastination or about beating laziness, because at one point I assumed that because I had discovered this, that I had become aware of this, that I solved the problem of procrastination. And that's not the case, because what ended up happening is I would find myself in that position again and feel really disappointed and think to myself, wait, I solved this. But it was only because it was just something different that time around. It's always a little bit different every time. So you can actually kind of have fun with that. It's like yet another little problem to solve. It's like, let's see if I can get to the heart of why it is I'm avoiding doing what I feel I need to be doing. So with that bit about procrastination out of the way, also too, as you can see by the slide, I like thinking of procrastinating as my some kind of other aspect of myself, my subconscious self, whatever, is actually being very energy efficient. Because when I'm itching to jump in, the results are always far greater than when I force myself to get started on something I'm not ready for. So the first tip was to take a deep breath. To me, that's kind of like the starting point, is to clear my thought, relax my body, because then, things can kind of start flowing. And then, so now these tips are kind of like the things that I've noticed along the way that can be the underlying problem. So first is that you don't have the problem clearly defined, whatever it is you're working on, some new feature, some refactoring, whatever it may be. I found that clearly defining the problem is super helpful if that's the issue. So doing something like drafting a Stack Overflow question, I can't tell you how many times There's been more times where I started writing a question to post on Stack Overflow and I solved my own problem. I'm sure you guys have experienced this as well at some point. So I think that defining the problem forces my mind to focus. And when the problem is too vague, then I have these vague solutions rolling around in my head, and I don't quite have that itch to get started because the solutions I have in my mind are too vague because the problem is too vague. Illustrate the problem. So for me, there is nothing quite like putting pen to paper. It's definitely different than typing on the computer. So while typing up a Stack Overflow question is nice, I feel like there's something about pen to paper that is different, especially depending on the type of problem that is. Sometimes it's really helpful to illustrate the problem using diagrams, charts, stick figures, you know, whatever you feel works for the problem that you're working on. So I find it's actually kind of fun if I'm feeling stuck and it's the type of problem that would benefit from an illustration. I grab like a nice crisp white piece of paper or like a favorite notebook and a favorite pen. I know personally I am particular about my writing utensils. I love me a good pen or a good marker or something. And go maybe even somewhere else, go away from where you normally work, go outside and write down and illustrate the problem. I love this one. This is one of my favorites. Write the code you want. So I don't know who this came from. I actually did a little bit of Googling to make sure I'm crediting, you know, all of these things are, you know, I've picked up along the way from various people. I don't know. I came across Dave Cleaver. It was on his Twitter account. I don't know if he's the original author of this little snippet here, but the full quote is write the code you want to see, then make it work. So every time I've done this has worked for me. So as you can see by my little, I want to use this. Yes, I got to use the little pointer thing. Okay, authenticator, if you're writing authentication, so this would be what I would want to call. I'd want to pass in a token, and this is exactly what I would want it to look like. I don't have a solution yet. I just am writing the line that I want to be able to write. And to me, that's just super, super helpful. And then you can work backwards from there. Like sometimes I won't even have a test to back that just because I need to play around a little bit first. And yeah, it just really works. If you've never tried that before, I definitely recommend giving that a try. Obviously, TDD, but I feel like there's some nuances to this because, you know, we say TDD and it's kind of a pretty broad thing. So for me, what I personally find helpful is, for some reason, I always felt like I had to start with unit tests. I don't know where I got that idea from, but you don't have to start with unit tests. Personally, I find it helpful to start with high-level tests like a feature test, acceptance test, integration test to drive the solution that you can throw away if you actually don't want it. So there's this tendency to not want to throw code away. I know personally, once I gave myself the permission to say, okay, I'm going to write this feature test to drive the solution, but I actually don't want to keep this around. To me, that's super freeing, super helpful. And also to just start with, if a unit test feels like the easiest to start with that. Just start with whatever you feel the easiest type of test is to write. Or even, like I said before, start, oh, did someone want to say something?
No.
No? Oh, okay. I was just getting a little feedback maybe. So, you know, you could start with the code like the tip before. Start with the code you want to write and work backwards until you get to a point where it feels obvious that you want to write a test. So you don't even necessarily have to start with a test, because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I just need to play around a little bit first. What's that?
I don't think anybody's saying anything. Is something coming across to you?
Oh. Yeah. It sounds like someone's asking a question or something. Weird. Okay, sorry.
Getting interference from something.
Okay.
We could mute until we have a question, and then I'll be less distracted.
Yeah, we're gonna mute our mic until somebody has a question. So
okay, that sounds like a good idea.
Maybe
Okay.
maybe you're getting feedback or something.
Sounds like maybe. Okay, that sounds good. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay, so starting with the code that you want to write and working backwards to get to a point where it feels obvious that you might want to start writing a test. So like I said, if you just want to play around, because personally sometimes I can't get into that test first mode. I gotta play a little bit. Do the simplest thing that could possibly work. I think this is a pretty popular one. You've probably heard of it before. So I'm paraphrasing a good example of this from wiki.c2.com, and that is, don't build a giant super efficient object if an array will do. And I really like that because for me personally, I have this tendency to want to get in there and create an elegant solution from the get-go. And that's not always necessary. And I found that taking the approach of doing the simplest thing helps me actually to gather more information about the problem quickly so that I can discern if actually maybe a giant super efficient object will be a better fit than an array. So without actually doing the simplest thing and going right to the more complex thing, you're not clearly making that decision. You're just kind of jumping right in. Step away. So I find most of the things I read, people say, oh, step away and go for a walk, which for certain situations might make sense, might be the perfect thing for that given moment. But sometimes I find that going for a walk, I'll still end up mulling over the problem. And I find that a lot of the times it's actually better to focus my attention on something completely different, like going and playing a video game or doing something fun and engaging to almost get my mind off the problem. So it's like you give all this energy towards the problem and you're thinking all these thoughts, and then you kind of put it away to simmer for a little bit. And most of the time, I would say that an idea will end up just coming to me on its own. It's like there's this tendency to want to get to the root of the problem. It's tempting to want to keep going even though you're feeling stuck and no solution is becoming clear. It can actually be beneficial to step away, even though maybe sometimes it feels unintuitive and it feels like you want to keep kind of chewing on it. It gets to a certain point where that's just not helpful anymore. And like stepping away and doing something totally different helps to bring about an answer. Pair with someone. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. I think this actually coincides a little bit with defining the problem, because obviously it can be really helpful to try and explain the problem to someone else. And also too, pairing with someone, that can also equate to just talking to somebody else that isn't necessarily even a programmer. You could talk to family, friends. I bounced things off my mom when I lived at home. I bounced things off my partner, which actually can sometimes be even more helpful because you have to explain it more simply. Gather more information. So sometimes I might feel stuck and I'm just not aware that it's because I need more information. So maybe it's that you have questions about the feature you're implementing or the code you're refactoring or code someone else wrote, and you need to go off and ask somebody like another developer or the client or the stakeholder some questions. Maybe you need to do a little research to see if someone else has solved a similar problem, even to sometimes trying to find like an open source project that tackles a similar or a related problem that I'm trying to tackle. That can be helpful, reading the source code of that to see how they solved something similar. Make a mess. I love this one. This is my favorite. I think this maybe came from Sandy Metz. Like I said, I'm trying to make sure I give credit where credit is due. This one was huge for me. So I've always struggled a little bit with perfectionism, and I think this helps me in that way because, and I think too, just for developers in general, we have all these guidelines of about what makes nice code, pretty code, clean code. So there's this massive feeling that at least I've had at times about making a mess. But the beauty about giving yourself permission to make a mess is it if you can get to a working solution as quickly as possible, even if it's messy, you gain information, you gain insight into maybe what the next step is. Maybe the solution you implemented doesn't actually work. You're going to gain something from it. You're not going to whip up a messy solution and not gain something from it. It also helps to break through that barrier of feeling like you have to come up with something perfect the first time around. And that actually reminds me of, I played this game at one point called Dungeon Defenders. It's a tower defense game. And I noticed at one point, I don't know if this was before or after I heard the whole like make a mess thing. So playing this game, I noticed like I would finish the map, I beat a map, and then I'd get to the next level, the next map, and I would immediately feel this like tense feeling. And I wasn't aware of it for the longest time. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait, why am I so tense? First of all, this is a video game, no big deal. Why would I feel tense? But I noticed the tension was actually because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. This is a new map. I don't know where to put the towers down. I don't know where the enemies are going to come from. And for whatever reason, that made me feel tense, like I was supposed to know. For whatever reason, I don't know where I got that idea, but I felt this feeling of like having to know. And I think the same applies to programming. We feel like we have to know right away, like we have to know a solution. So giving myself permission to make a mess, or in the case of the game, I told myself like, just play the map once through with no intention of beating it, just to gain information. So make a mess, write a simple solution with the intention of simply gaining insight instead of actually having this, elegant working solution. So obviously this also complements the do the simplest thing that could possibly work. So you take these two things together and ends up being a nice combination. So lastly, just some small little tips from my experience when I'm dealing with not necessarily just dealing with a complex problem, but just feeling unmotivated in general. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there's times where I feel unmotivated and I'm not sure why. It's not necessarily that the problem is hard, but for whatever reason, I'm just not motivated, but I want to be. I never want to feel unmotivated. It always feels good to feel really motivated, really productive, solving problems, writing code. So these are just some things that I find can be the cause. Like I said, feeling unmotivated results in procrastination, and there's always good reason. There's always a good reason. It's never just, I'm not doing this just because I don't want to. There's a reason why you don't want to. There's a reason why I don't want to. So first thing would be maybe when you're working on an existing code base that's poorly written. So in that case, I find it helpful to don't focus on the bad code, focus on the good code that I'll be adding to the code base, and the fact that that will bring it one step closer to being better, being one step closer to overall improvement. And actually, I find that the worse the code is, the more satisfying it is to clean it up, refactor it, add new, well-written code. It's almost like it actually reminds me of that satisfying feeling that I personally get. Reminds me of when I was a kid, I would watch cleaning products because I just loved the parts where they would have something really dirty and then they would clean it. So it's like that is the satisfaction that you get from working on a crappy code base, is because the contrast is so big between the good stuff and the bad stuff. So it can be actually very satisfying. So another thing is that I find helpful is to think about the why behind what I'm doing. I might think about the impact or the effect that my code might have. So I like to put myself in the perspective of the end user of the system I'm writing the code for, or maybe even put myself in the position of the next developer that might work on the code base, because I know personally when I use a system or an application, and I can tell when the people or the person that wrote it, I can tell that they cared. Or even code from another developer, you can look at a chunk of code and you can tell that person cared about what they were doing. And there's just something nice about that feeling. So I like to think that I'm putting that out into the world. Another thing I find inspiring or motivating is thinking about excellence. So I love thinking about, okay, I'm going to commit to pouring myself entirely into what I'm working on. Doesn't even matter what it is. It could be the most mundane thing, but thinking like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do I'm going to do the best job ever on this one particular thing, regardless of how important it is, how big or small it is. To me, that is hugely motivating. Another thing is maybe at some point you dreamed about being in the position that you're in the job that you have, whatever that may be. I know for me, I remember when I was 10, I have a lot of kid stories in this talk, I'm just realizing. When I was 10, we got our first computer, and I remember sitting in front of the computer with a DOS prompt open and wishing that I knew something to type. I wish that I could do something. And now when I remember that, I realized to myself, well, I dreamed of that as a kid, and I'm doing it now. And all of a sudden it brings this sudden sense of appreciation for what you're doing. And of course, appreciation always leads to feeling inspired to get started. Another thing is to figure out what I can do to enjoy what I'm working on. And sometimes that can be like a little bit of, I don't know what to call it, like a crutch or something. Like, for example, making your favorite drink. Like, personally, I love to brew myself like a nice hot cup of coffee, or to make a delicious snack. For me, that helps me. It could be different for everybody, of course. Another thing that I could think of would be like maybe making a playlist of music to work to. Maybe even if you have a laptop or you have the ability to go work somewhere different, like go to a coffee shop or just work outside, change your scenery, and you'll know the thing that kind of makes you go, yeah, like the thing that gets you a little bit excited, that's the thing to go do. That's the thing that will kind of get you into that flow. Another thing is to watch other people code. So personally, if I watch some video tutorials of like watching someone refactor something, or even maybe, I don't think I've ever personally tried this, but I thought it was a good idea to shadow a coworker for, 10, 20 minutes. I personally find that really inspiring. Just watching someone else code makes me want to go code. Another thing would be the Pomodoro technique. I actually use this technique on a mostly daily basis. I don't follow it consistently, but that's partly because sometimes, when you get in the flow of things, you kind of just want to keep going and you don't want to take that break. So for anybody that's not familiar, the Pomodoro technique is like you work for a chunk of time and then you take a short break. So I do 25 minutes of solid focused work, and then I take a 5-minute break. Now, like I said, if I'm really on a roll, I don't tend to do a Pomodoro. I just keep working. But a lot of the times I feel like the actual benefit to that is, well, there's actually a couple benefits. So one is that it is a reminder to do some stretching. So obviously we're at a computer all day staring at a screen. I feel like, that's a healthy thing to do, is to do some stretches, some hand stretches, some neck stretches, whatnot. But the other benefit is that if you go and do something totally different, like sometimes I'll go clean something for that 5 minutes just to do something totally different. And then when I come back, whatever I was working on, I have kind of a higher perspective. So sometimes I find myself working on a problem where I've gone down too far of a path without realizing it. And I think sometimes that break gives me that higher perspective of like, okay, what am I working on here? Is what I'm doing productive? Is this the path I need to be going down? So I find that those two things are benefits to using that technique. And then of course, when all else fails and your heart is just not in it and none of that stuff is working, to me, that's the signal to just go do something else entirely, if that's an option for you. So it's always a little different. And like I said before, what works in one instance might not work in the next. So for me, I've just chalked it up to that this is going to be a part of my life and that I should just have fun figuring it out in every moment. It's like a little adventure every time. So thank you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to give this talk. I was really excited to share all this information. Like I said, I feel like it's kind of a very personal topic for me. And I'd be happy if you guys have any questions, or if you have any tips on your own, I would love to hear it. So let me switch over.
Do I have a question?
Is there a usual hierarchy you go through? Like you start off doing one technique, and if that doesn't work, you go to another one? Or how do you, out of all the things that you listed, which,
Yeah.
in the moment, decide which one to do? Or how do you decide?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I think it's just always a little different. I'd have to say sometimes I don't even necessarily catch myself right away in knowing, being aware that I'm actually avoiding. You know, I might be checking, you know, Twitter, checking my phone, you know, going and getting a snack, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm procrastinating on this thing. And then once I become aware that I'm doing that, then I know that, to me, that's the signal, that's the flag that means that there's an underlying reason why I'm avoiding what I'm avoiding. So as far as like, I don't have that. That actually might be a really good idea, is to have a checklist. I'm glad you asked the question, because that can be really helpful to be able to consult that, because usually I just kind of, you know, start with a deep breath that clears my mind, and then from there I just feel like kind of an intuition as to what might be a good solution for this particular context. And like I said, all of the things, all of the tips, it's always different. So I feel like for the rest of my life, I'm going to be picking up even more tips as I go, even more insights as I go. Good question.
How do you, so let's say you have several projects that are equally, they're all equally as important. How do you figure out which one you do first? And this is more if you're doing multiple projects and stuff. So I'm ADD. I tend to like, oh, I'm doing a little bit here and I'm doing a little bit here, and I don't get shit done anywhere. So I guess I need to focus, but how do you handle that?
Okay, that's another good question. I love these questions. So you feel like you don't get much done? You don't feel like you can get much traction?
Yeah, I feel like I don't get much traction because I tend to focus. I think what I do is I tend to focus on everything all at once. Because, you know, not that all of it's due at once, but it's like I almost feel that way times. So I feel like I'm jumping screens over screen, you know, different screens after screens, and they're all different projects.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. That was actually, you know, this is perfect because Lewis, this is maybe doesn't quite answer your question totally, but I'll go back to it. Lewis, you have been a role model for me in regards to that, because you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. So
No.
when I have like multiple things pulling my attention, like you said, you feel like everything's urgent.
Yeah.
I realize that I am no good when I'm in that kind of urgent state. Like you said, you don't feel like you're productive. So one is recognizing it's not beneficial to be in that urgent mode. Can you mute me, or can you mute temporarily for me so I'm not getting the feedback?
Oh, mute this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay, so a couple times I had seen Lewis, like someone asked for something, and Lewis said, I'm heading out for the day, or I'm working on this other thing right now. I'll get to it in a little bit. And I was like, wait, you can do that? Like I can say that to people? Like I don't have to just drop what I'm doing and work on this other thing right now? Because, and it's not, at first it's this, for me, it's this feeling of like I'm going to be mean or I'm going to upset somebody. But when you realize how unproductive you are, you realize you're not only you're not serving yourself, but you're not serving the other people that you're working for by jumping around from project to project. So I think just that realization in itself will help. That I totally still get sucked into that though. And then I'll realize, okay, I'm in that frenzy mode. I just need to calm down. I can only do one thing at a time. No one expects us to do multiple things at a time. And then also too, to go back to what you're saying about like, you know, having the ADD with things, maybe for me, I would maybe try time blocking to see if that works, and just experimenting. That's always, for me, that always works. Is I don't have to solve my problems, whatever they may be. I just have to experiment and play around, see what works, see what sticks, see what doesn't. Does that help or answer your question?
You can't hear me right?
Okay.
Yes,
There
it
we go.
does.
Yes. Okay.
I have
Cool.
one more. I mean, I don't know if anybody else. No. So, have you heard of? There's this book called "A Technique for Producing Ideas."
No.
No, it's actually
Sounds good.
yeah, it's actually an essay called James by James Young, and I've
Okay.
read it before. And a lot of kind of what you talked about with the walking away has to do with the creative process.
Okay.
It's a good read, easy. It's like 42 pages, so it's my type of book.
What's it called again?
It's called A Technique for Producing Ideas.
Okay.
It's like $2 for the Kindle version.
Okay. Sounds good.
But I
check
read
out.
it early on when I was kind of figuring if I wanted to do graphic design. But it talks about mulling over the idea, research, and then walking away and doing absolutely nothing related.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah,
tends to help a
That
lot.
really helps.
And
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder what the science behind that is. I feel like I've heard other people talk about that too. And, you know, all of these things I've probably, you know, just picked up from experience, but also listening to other people and what works for them. I feel like maybe I heard Kent Beck talk about that, or no, is that someone that's a big investor in the tech industry talked about like hammock, like going and laying in a hammock or you know, something like that. Yeah.
When I've been doing the different, so I work from home for the most part, but the coffee shops, today I was on the porch working out. I mean, everything sounds very parallel to kind of what you do, because like I get bored sitting in the same spot, so then I have to change up the scene. It's kind of what I call it. And I'm like, let me change up the scene.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah,
So
that works for me.
That's pretty cool. Any other questions? Lewis has a super serious question.
No, I felt like I was going to say something about what you were saying, but I can't remember.
What's that about? What you taught me?
I just keep on thinking of skateboarding. Like,
Skateboarding, yeah. I was actually going to put that as an
Okay.
example. Although I don't have anywhere close by that I could do that, which is kind of disappointing. I kind of want to, that's one of the many reasons why I'd like to move, is to move closer to somewhere that's nice, and or get different wheels, because I think the wheels I have are too hard. So it's like, I don't go very fast. But yeah, skateboarding, yeah, totally. Awesome.
I think just moving around, like sitting so much, getting your blood flow.
Yeah.
You tend
That
to,
helps.
like if you're stuck on something, you tend to just like want to work through it and like try again and again, and then you just start throwing things at it. Like, let me just try this and this. And try yourself.
Yeah, not productive in those moments. At least I don't always catch myself that I'm doing that. So, you know, but when I do, it's like, okay, yeah, we need to get up, move around for sure. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think that's all we have for the questions. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. This is my very first. I've popped my talk cherry.
That's awesome.
I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah,
Good job.
Good job.
awesome.
I think we'll take a little break and yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Cool.
I'll talk about some Ruby things going on. And you can stick around if you want.
Okay, cool.
I'll, just leave it, or I'll stop the broadcast now.
Okay.
We'll start again.
I might go